always thought the 1990s Ford Bronco was big, but this is in fact the biggest Bronco ever conceived. This is the new Bronco Raptor. I know, there's some arguments to be made that 1990s Bronco was still bigger because the body on this Bronco Raptor is not in fact that much wider than a regular Bronco if you don't want to include these fender flares, and that 90s Bronco was just chunky all the way around. But this is a serious modification to the formula that's made the current Bronco so successful. This is 9.8 inches wider with a track, and that would be the distance between the two wheels there, 8.6 inches wider than the regular Bronco, to make this not just the most off-road capable, but also the most desert running capable version of the Bronco. That's part of the mission of the Raptor lineup. Not just regular off-road capability, but that unique kind of desert running capability. We find a revised front end here, but the changes are not just skin deep. The body itself has been modified versus the regular model to make it more rigid, and it has an entirely different frame underneath. But let's start out with the front end changes. Obviously we get different bumpers. They're still metal bumpers here, and they still have a removable outer section if you want to improve clearance to these big tires. We have LED fog lights down below, and then the intersections have these little plastic covers on them because they were concerned that in some jurisdictions there might be too many forward lights pointing forward. Most people are probably just going to take that off. It does make the fog lights brighter. Large, really chunky recovery hooks there, bigger, massive skid plates all the way around the vehicle, and they're considerably thicker than the ones that we find on the regular Bronco because, of course, the mission for this is high-speed off-roading. Then we get amber accents inside the large LED headlights, Ford spelled out really big across the front rather than Bronco, and then they have discreetly hidden the radar sensor right here in the center of the bumper. Now, that is one possible misstep there, because if you do plan on putting a brush guard on the front of your vehicle, it could interfere with the radar sensor, and that's why in the Jeep Wrangler, we see the radar sensor behind the windscreen. We don't find it in here, but we do have lots of cameras all the way around, 360-degree camera, the front one is right there, front parking sensors, which is a handy touch. If it wasn't obvious from the front, it's really obvious from the side that these fender flares are absolutely massive. And although some folks think that they look silly, I think they look cool on the Bronco, and I really hope that Ford decides to give us a wide body look on other Bronco formats without the rest of the upgrades that we find in the Raptor, because I think that would be kind of a neat twist. We have gill-like vents right here in the front quarter panel, and we still have the cargo tie-downs and this very square hood profile. The hood also gets the Raptor treatment with a big black louver section, Raptor logos, and then moving around the side of the vehicle, you'll notice that all Raptors come as 4-door models. That's because of high-speed stability concerns. Back here we have yet more big fender flares, as you'd expect, and this front section is replaceable. That's a nice touch because obviously as rocks get flung off by the front tires, this is exactly where they would land. I must admit that the rear fender flare looks a little bit unfinished because of the really short overhang that we find back there in the Bronco, but they were essential because of the track increase and the absolutely enormous tires that we have here. These are 37-inch tires, the largest standard equipment tire on any production SUV in America, and these are largely responsible for the increase in ground clearance in the Bronco. We have over 4.8 inches more clearance than we find in the regular model, 13.1 inches total. And the only way to improve ground clearance on a solid axle design is to make the tires taller, because the solid axle and the differential in the middle, those are your low points in ground clearance. So that's why we have these truly massive tires. The size and, importantly, the weight of these tires is really obvious when you take a look at the spare, which is still mounted on the rear door of the Bronco. It definitely requires a bit more heft to open and close than the regular model, and they had to restructure the door and reinforce it to handle the added weight of these big tires. If you're lacking in upper body strength, you should know it can be a bit of a lift to get this tire off and on the rear hatch here. Now, up here we have a redesigned brake module because these are quite a bit bigger than the regular tires that we find on the back door of a regular Bronco. So they had to move this module up, and it does really cut down some of the visibility on the rear of the vehicle. It also hangs significantly lower. It's really just barely above that 2-inch hitch receiver in the back. Big tires means less mechanical advantage versus the regular Bronco, so Ford decided to beef things up under the hood. They grabbed the 3-liter twin-turbo V6 engine from the Lincoln Aviator, then cranked the dial up to 11, giving it 418 horsepower and 440 pound-feet of torque. It's mated to a standard 10-speed automatic transmission and a new 2-speed transfer case with a 67-to-1 crawl ratio. Then they decided to upgrade the axles, so we have Dana 50 axles in the back, Dana 44s in the front. Obviously, the most direct competitor to the Bronco is the Wrangler, although there really isn't a corollary to the Raptor in the Wrangler lineup. But as competitors, front seat comfort is certainly one of the big reasons you might want to get a Bronco over the Wrangler. The driver's seat and the front passenger seat are significantly more comfortable. Both the driver and front passenger seats feature a multi-way power design with two-way adjustable lumbar support, and then over here we have a manual tilt telescopic steering column with a pretty decent range of motion. Certainly more adjustable than we find in the Wrangler. So if you're larger or taller, you're more likely to find a better driving position in here than in the Jeep, although you should know that we get a teeny tiny bit less headroom front and rear. In addition to the four-door model offering better high-speed stability, clearly the four-door model is also the best-selling version of the Bronco, and it's the most practical. Behind the front seats, with it comfortably adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, I have about 1.5 inches of legroom left. And the seat bottom cushion is not slammed all the way to the ground. Although we find a little bit less headroom in here than in the Wrangler, I find these seats, again, a bit more comfortable for adults. The seat bottom cushion's a little bit higher off the ground, and the way the ceiling is shaped is just a bit better. We get a little bit more head clearance in some areas. Moving over here to the middle, I still have plenty of room. It goes down to maybe about 1/2 inch there. And then scooting all the way over to the right side of the vehicle, if I put that headrest back up, you see this front seat is all the way back in its tracks. My knees are definitely digging into the seat, but I could move that seat a little bit further forward. Now, these seats feature a center armrest with 2 cup holders right there. And if I pull on this tab, they fold in a 60-40 fashion. You have to manually fold that little headrest right there, and then the seat bottom cushion moves itself down to make that fold in a one-step operation. Despite that descending seat bottom cushion, this is still not quite as low as the cargo area in the back, although there is a little bit of a ramp to help you slide cargo from the cargo area right over here to the seat back. For the adventurous in the crowd, Ford has given us this interesting mesh design on the back of the front seats that allows you to clip things like carabiners into that grid, and then there's a pretty typical mesh pocket below. Behind door number 5, we find approximately 33 cubic feet of cargo capacity. The swing to the side door is a little bit less practical than a hatch, but obviously it's the only way you're going to put that spare tire back there. And because the spare tire is externally mounted, we have a lot more storage area back here than you'd find if they'd tried to slide it underneath the vehicle. Even though this is pretty high off the ground, the cargo load-in height is really not far off something like a Jeep Grand Cherokee, and the cargo area itself is very, very square, making it a lot easier to put big, bulky items inside. Thanks to the squareness of this cargo area, I was able to squeak 8 24-inch roller bags back here. This is the hardtop version, so of course we have this glass that pops up separately, but because the Bronco was designed as a soft top vehicle as well, we have essentially a cage back here in this area with a brace that says Ford Performance in the Raptor model, so that is going to limit the cargo capacity just a little bit. Going for a spin around the inside, we have auxiliary switches right up here just above the rearview mirror. I love that a lot of off-road vehicles and pickup trucks are giving us these kinds of auxiliary switches because it makes adding accessories really, really easy, and it gives things a much more finished look if you do. Since this is the hard top, you can see that we have sort of trunk liner carpet, I guess you'd say, right up here on this section. These are the latches for removing these individual sections. You can remove the front 2 sections individually, and then there is a separate section right back there over the rear. You can see that we have black plastic sections up here, but there's some body color bits that are coming through. This model has the red seat belts, and a big important difference between this and the Wrangler, we have curtain airbags in here, something that for some reason Jeep has said they cannot integrate in the Wrangler, but yet we have them here in the Bronco. So if you're concerned about some additional safety improvements, you might want to choose this over that vehicle. And because these are part of the structure of the vehicle, not the doors, they're still going to deploy, although their usefulness may be a little bit more limited if you don't have the doors attached to the vehicle. Moving back down here again, there are those seat belts. We have red accents. We have Raptor embossed in that center section of the seat. This is sort of an imitation suede insert there. And then the center section is perforated, so that way that red can show right through those center sections there. I'm not sure how well this Alcantara-like fabric is going to live long-term, whether it's going to pill or not, but it has a very attractive look. And it's a little difficult to tell on camera, but this is sort of a tritone interior. Maybe it's a bit more obvious on the doors, but these are dark blue sections, so navy blue, and then the bulk of the door is a charcoal color, and then they're black and then red accents here and there. The doors are made from mainly hard touch plastics, but as we move on over to the door, we find a look that's a bit more modern and a bit more upscale versus the Wrangler. So soft touch, injection molded, and then stitched dashboard components. So it actually looks like this is a separate stitched piece on top of the injection molded dash. You'll really notice it right over here with these seams on this section of the dashboard and next to it. Bunches of rubbery buttons up here for various different functions like the locking differentials, front and rear, the tank turn mode that helps it turn tighter right there. You can turn off the traction and stability control. And then up top here, we have a camera mount point for your GoPro, and then regular USB and USB-C charge ports with a tray so you can store your goodies right up there. Now down here, we have one of the big reasons for tech-friendly people to look at the Bronco over the Wrangler. This is a much larger LCD infotainment system than we find available in that vehicle. It supports Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, as you can see, but it won't occupy the entire screen. The software functionality is pretty similar to what we find in Ford's pickup truck lineup. We have the zone lighting system that we also see in Ford's pickup, so you can turn on the lights underneath the mirrors right there to shine around the vehicle. That's a kind of a handy touch if you're camping. Below that area, we find the controls for the dual zone automatic climate control system, also the engine start stop button there, extra physical buttons for the infotainment system. I really appreciate that Ford gives us a physical button for the 360-degree camera system, and the system engages pretty rapidly, making it much more useful for parking lot maneuvers because this is a really big vehicle. You can see over here that we have a modified icon for the Bronco. You can see the little fender flares there, and that black section is the outline of the vehicle to help guide you into some of those narrower parking spots. Below the climate controls, we have a Qi wireless charging mat, although some larger phones might have difficulty fitting in there. We have 2 USB inputs there, large grab handle for the passenger. No soft padding on either side of the center tunnel, though. I do wish that we had had a little bit of that for more aggressive off-roading. Pretty typical console shifter here, drive mode, manual mode all the way back there. We then have the drive mode selector for the Bronco. It allows you to rotate through all the various off-road modes, and then of course choose the modes for the four-wheel drive system. Some of them will be automatically engaged by those drive modes. We also have 4 high with the center coupling locked, 4 low, and then this center module here allows you to enable and disable the trail control 1-pedal drive mode. Down here we have the window switches and the mirror control because of course the doors come off the vehicle, so they didn't want to put those controls on the doors. We then have a padded center armrest that opens to reveal a decently sized storage cubby between the 2 front seats. Over on the driver's side, we find a large LCD instrument cluster. It is configurable, although it's not as configurable as some of Ford's more recent LCDs, like the one that we're going to see in the new 2023 Wrangler, for instance. There's a lot of various information being displayed by this screen. We can, for instance, get things like the off-road status, some auxiliary gauges. We can get a more typical view where we have a speedometer and tachometer separately. Lots of gauges right there up top, stability, control, status, those kinds of things, the additional gauges, lots of different readouts. I really appreciate the cylinder head temperature if you're really running your engine hard in a hot climate. Moving out from there, we find basically the same Bronco steering wheel, a few tweaks here. Sport grips up top, little red section there so you know which way is up. Raptor logo down there at the bottom, rubbery coated buttons all over everything to help keep dust at bay. So over here we have the ability to change the steering effort in the vehicle, normal, comfort, or sport mode. Over here is a Raptor mode button that pulls up the My Mode settings automatically. Controls for the adaptive cruise control and lane keeping system over there. Then over here on this side, we find the controls for the adaptive dampers and then the active exhaust system. You can see that we can go through 4 different exhaust modes there. We have quiet, we have normal, we have sport, and then we have really loud. Not everyone seems to be a fan of the very aggressively styled dashboard here. We do have large air vents on either side with grab handles for the driver and front passenger. Moving across the dashboard, you can see that we have the exact same thing going on over there on the passenger side, and then this large plastic section in the middle of the dash with that big Bronco logo right there. There is plenty of room in this dashboard, however. Lots of room in the glove compartment. It is definitely more accommodating than we find in the Wrangler because of the speaker locations in here. We don't have a big speaker in the dashboard like we do find in that Wrangler. Instead, Ford puts the speakers up higher on the dashboard and just in different locations to really give you a bit more room. And of course, this has the optional surround sound system. The most important thing to know about the Bronco Raptor out on the road is that the inside is the same size as a regular Bronco. The outside is definitely not that same size. It is significantly wider. So It is a little bit difficult at times to tell exactly where the Raptor begins and ends. Just remember that it's going to be about 6 to 7 inches beyond what looks like the side of the vehicle. The effect of this is that although the regular Bronco can feel appropriately sized for a wide variety of different kinds of trails, the Raptor can feel a little on the large side, especially if you need to make tricky 3-point turns or 4 or 5-point turns to get out of sticky situations, or the awful situation where you have to back all the way back a trail because you end up with something like a log across the road that you really can't traverse. Definitely keep those things in mind. On the other hand, the Bronco is exactly the kind of bonkers that I love. 0 to 60 happened in this model in 5.7 seconds. This is not quite as powerful as an F-150 Raptor. I'm kind of surprised they didn't try and stuff that engine under the hood. Maybe it wouldn't have fit quite right under there with all the cooling required. Now, this will definitely go quick 0 to 60, but stopping it with these all-terrain tires on it, that's going to take a lot longer than you might think. 160 feet to be exact. That is an extremely long stopping distance. And that's because these tires are targeted at things that are much more aggressive than the trail that I'm on here. These are mud terrain tires. They're designed for mudding duty, extreme off-roading, etc. And that's why we find the beadlock capable wheels on this model. As you'd expect, in addition to stopping distance, there's a trade-off for the on-road handling ability of the vehicle because of these tires. I think that's an okay trade-off, however. This handles fairly well because the tires are pretty chunky, pretty wide, and the Bronco has a really nice suspension tune to it. This has an independent front suspension, which is something that we don't find on the Wrangler. The Wrangler is perhaps the modder's dream. It's the one with the solid axles, front and rear. You can jack it up, you can do all sorts of mods to it a little bit more easily. And there's a reason that a lot of serious modifications to the Bronco, a lot of those folks end up swapping out the independent front suspension for a solid axle in the front. But if you plan on daily driving your Bronco, you're not going to want to do that. And that's where I think Ford's decision-making process was actually pretty good, because the vast majority of Bronco owners are daily driving their vehicle. And this is just so much better to live with. It handles better, it feels better, it doesn't chatter across the pavement like the Wrangler sometimes can. This feels more stable, more sorted on the road, and even though theoretically it gives up a little bit versus a Bronco like this with a solid axle, it's not really big enough for me to care about. Thanks to the high-profile tires and the adaptive suspension system, this Bronco easily gets an A+ when it comes to the ride quality. This is the kind of vehicle you can spend a long time on. Rougher roads, rough trails, rocky trails, off-roading, etc. Absolutely no problem. I love the fact that they gave this the adaptive suspension system, so you can adapt the suspension to various different kinds of off-roading or just your daily commute, of course. And this is one of those situations where the width means I actually cannot continue on this trail. That tree has fallen in a recent storm, and rather unfortunately, that means we're going to have to back up. This is a good place to talk about the trail turn assist feature, the tank turn button basically that we find up there. This works in 4 high and 4 low. In 4 high and 4 low, because the coupling in the center is locked, the transfer case is locked, the front and rear differential inputs are spinning at the same rate. So you'd actually get a slightly larger turning circle than you would in 4 auto. But what this does is it really tries to drag a wheel around and try and compress things as much as possible on those differentials. So they're still open, obviously they're not locked, but it does allow us to turn tighter. You can see in these maneuvers it's not exactly tight, but it is definitely better than if the vehicle didn't have this feature, and it really makes this a lot easier to live with on some tight trails. Now, it is going to tear up the trail a little bit more than if you simply had a vehicle with a tight turning radius, but it really helps solve some of the size problems depending on the terrain that you're driving on. Fortunately, we can go down this section of the terrain, which is a good example of the kind of articulation we find in the Bronco and the ground clearance, because there are some large logs and things like that around. This does this sort of trail incredibly well. And again, the suspension is really, really well adapted to any kind of off-roading. It's so comfortable. This is incredibly easy to live with. This sort of feels like a Subaru Outback, I guess you'd say, in terms of its suspension tuning. And then, of course, if things get really hairy, we have the locking front differential, the locking rear differential, and then 4 low to rely upon. But for the vast majority of off-roading situations, off-road trails, etc., you will probably be just fine with this vehicle in 4 high because there's so much torque and the tires are really well adapted to a variety of different surfaces. And Ford has also done a really good job with the software in off-camber situations like this. Like, I'm actually going to end up with one wheel off the ground, and I'm just going to go ahead and enable that sharp turn mode. Let's see if we can clear this without, oh, it's doing a really good job there. Oh, no, just a little bit too large to clear around through that corner. But even in these off-kilter situations, with the turn assist enabled, it does an excellent job. Of course, it has to unlock the rear differential, so I didn't get that benefit in that off-camber situation. But the software does such a good job that in a lot of different situations, you honestly don't really need 4-high or the locking diff. The system does an incredible job of moving power around. Now, you're going to want those modes if you're in a situation where you're going to be depending on power moving side to side often, because the brakes are eventually going to overheat. So in those situations, you want to turn the lockers on, but for most folks, this is just an incredible four-wheel drive system in its own right. Now back to the numbers. In terms of cabin noise, at 50 miles an hour, I measured 73 decibels in here. That is a little on the loud side, even though we have the hard top in this model. If you had the soft top in a Bronco, it would probably be a little bit louder. Now, when it comes to fuel economy, that's frankly abysmal. I've been averaging 11 miles per gallon in this Bronco. 15 miles per gallon is theoretically what the EPA says, city and highway. But if you're driving it a little bit too fast out on the open highway, or you're doing a lot of off-roading, obviously expect something a lot closer to 10, 11, or 12 miles per gallon. The auto start stop system does help, but if you live in a hotter climate, you're probably not going to be using it very often. And of course, that's only going to help you out in city driving. Out on the open highway, it's just a big brick pushing its way through the wind, so set your expectations accordingly. You might be surprised to hear that I don't find the Bronco Raptor a one-trick pony. Yes, this is very clearly designed to be a dune running kind of off-road vehicle with extreme rock crawling ability as well, but Ford makes it very easy to live with on a daily basis. This is not as hardcore as some people might think, because we have the adaptive suspension system that makes this really comfortable. And then there's the reality that off-road vehicles just tend to have big chunky tires, and that's also pretty comfortable. The interior is easy to live with. The exhaust system has a quiet mode, so you're not waking up your neighbors. The steering is also really nicely done. Yes, it's not going to stop or handle as well as, well, let's be frank, a whole lot of other SUVs. I think it's more or less acceptable. The stopping distance is the only thing that would generally concern me, and that's the kind of thing that you can plan for if you drive defensively. It is going to take 50 feet longer to stop this than the average luxury car out there, and about 30 to 40 feet longer than the average SUV in the United States. Even large full-size SUVs like a Ford Expedition or Lincoln Aviator, they're going to stop a lot shorter than the Bronco. But they're not going to be anywhere near this kind of fun. If I were shopping for a Bronco and I could afford it, I would absolutely get the Raptor. I think it looks cool, and I think it's just better in pretty much every way versus the regular Bronco. Well, with the exception of the price tag, of course. So let's talk about that now. Theoretically, the Bronco starts at $32,295 for the 2023 model year and will top out right around $83,000. We don't have exact pricing details for 2023 just yet because the order books haven't officially opened for regular orders. Here's what's going on. There was such a demand for the Bronco in 2022 that all those orders filled up right away, and now Ford is converting some of those 2022 pre-orders into 2023 model year orders. Once those have been converted, likely sometime around November 14th, then theoretically the order books will open again for new dealer orders to be placed. So if you want a 2023 Bronco and you don't want to just try and find one off of a dealer lot that maybe someone else didn't want, you need to act fast. You need to get down to the Ford dealer, get on that list, and then starting November 14th, theoretically, you'll be able to do that. Now, Ford has not said exactly when or if those order books will open. Some of this is open to interpretation and rumor, and it's entirely possible that all 2023 order books will be filled with those pre-order holders. So who really knows on that front? The Bronco is a little bit more expensive than a comparable Jeep Wrangler. The Wrangler starts at $30,945, but it will end up actually a little bit more expensive if you opt for the V8 engine at around $89,775. Now, these prices are without destination, so they will get a little bit higher. Certainly higher is the Defender, starting at $55,100, going all the way up to $123,000, and that's just for the Defender 110. I'm not talking about the new 3-row model. The Defender really isn't a Bronco competitor, however. Neither is the 4Runner. Yes, the 4Runner is off-road focused. Yes, it's very reliable, and it does have a solid rear axle, but it's not the same thing as the Bronco, really. Its price tag is much narrower, and that's because it is a competitor to the base versions of the Bronco, admittedly if you don't want to take your roof or your doors off, but it's going to cost you a little bit more than those base Bronco formats. Now on the top end, obviously, it's less expensive because we don't find the more powerful engines in the 4Runner, and really, we don't really find much that's modern in the current generation 4Runner. Now, because there isn't much like the Bronco on the market in the US, the final scores are a little bit tricky. Let's just roll through things here. Obviously, the look is fantastic, and everything about this vehicle, even if we're talking about the base model, is more than capable for what 99% of Bronco shoppers are likely to do with their Bronco. Now, if you do want to take things to the absolute next level, you should keep in mind some of the limitations that I discussed here. No solid front axle. You can swap one of those in aftermarket if you wanted to. And obviously, there are a few pros and cons to the just sheer dimensions of this Bronco Raptor as well. But I think the interesting thing about it is that even though it is enormous in terms of its width, it's fairly decent on-road, and I think it's a reasonable balance of a daily driver commuter that can also do some seriously incredible things off-road. Now, some of that compromise is going to be found in the absolute handling scores, definitely the long braking distance, and the high road noise scores as well. Also, fuel economy is pretty darn terrible. But the biggest problem with the Bronco is simply that it is so popular, good luck finding one. If you want a Bronco and you don't have a pre-order or an order already in on one, your best bet is to call around and get on lists at local dealers, see if they have any that nobody has claimed, and be prepared to pay well over MSRP for that Bronco. Or simply try and think of something else. You're going to find similarly short availability on the desirable formats of Jeep Wrangler, so good luck finding a 392 Rubicon, for instance. But if you could make do with a lesser format of Wrangler, you could probably find one more easily than the Bronco, although supplies are pretty short on the plug-in hybrid models and the off-road oriented Wrangler models as well, like the Rubicon in any flavor. You should also keep in mind that pricing has increased on the Bronco for 2023, and it's likely that sometime in the middle of the year the price might increase again. We've seen relatively regular pricing updates from Ford on a number of their popular models due to the supply shortage, tied with the parts and parts supply chain issues that Ford and basically everybody else have been dealing with this calendar year. You should know that not every trim of the Bronco is going to have the same equipment as you found on it in 2022. In fact, Ford has said pretty openly that some of the things that they have intended to put on different 2023 trims may or may not happen based on the availability of components. That's definitely something that you should keep in mind. If you can wait for a Bronco, you might want to wait till 2024 to see if things ease up, or, of course, choose something else. Now, on that choosing something else, I am a little bit torn. What would I do if I were shopping in this segment and I had a budget that was around $80,000 to $85,000? I have to admit that the Wrangler is a solid competitor. The Wrangler is better at a bunch of things. If you want to put aftermarket bumpers on the front, the position of the radar sensor is really critical for that. You can fold down the front windshield. You can get power top options on the Wrangler. Those are all pretty darn cool. And I do find the dimensions a little bit more sensible. Now it's time to sound off in the comment section. What would you do if you were looking to spend between $80,000 and $85,000? Would you get something like an F-150 Raptor instead? That does appear to be a bit more available than the Bronco Raptor. It's going to cost you about as much, but it's not going to be as easy to park. Or would you get a Wrangler 392? The 6.4-liter Hemi engine sounds absolutely epic. And if I were simply buying a vehicle off of the engine exhaust note and perhaps ease of parking, it is going to be easier in that Wrangler, I would probably get the Wrangler. But the Bronco is more than simply the sum of its admittedly really excellent components. It actually feels better than you would think something that has the off-road capability, desert running capability, just general capability that the Bronco does. And if I were looking for a vehicle that I needed to daily commute in and use for weekend fun, then it would certainly be the Bronco. On the other hand, if I were buying something simply for off-road weekend duty, then I would probably focus on the Wrangler and its solid front axle. Let me know what you think about that down there. Find us at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of those social places. And of course, check out the EV Buyer's Guide channel and the podcast channel as well if you want to get news and information updates, as well as lots and lots of opinions on the latest new cars. I'll see all of you later.